So here we are getting ready to start on our teardown of the power steering system on this John Deere 630. Particularly in these videos, we'll be looking at the rebuild of the power steering pump. There's a couple reasons you might choose to tackle the rebuild of a power steering pump. One might be failure of the oil seals, in which you see oil dripping down in around the fan shaft on your generator, alternator, whatever you have. In this area, external leaking obviously would be one reason for needing to rebuild your pump. A second reason may be after diagnosis and you find out that perhaps your pump is not producing any pressure, in which case possibly a small key that drives the pump internally could be sheared. Or you may find just low pressure, your pump's not building enough pressure. We'll go through some of that testing procedure in a bit. Before we get started on this, Steiner offers two different repair catalogs, the REP 3247 and the REP 3243, I believe it is. One is basically for the older style systems. You'll just have to look and see which one corresponds to the one you need. I will make a note that the REP 3243, I just want to make sure I get the right number. It includes a little bit more information than the 47. It actually includes some service bulletin updates. Nice thing about it, it includes a color diagram of how does your power steering system work, just to get a basic understanding of when you turn the steering wheel one way, what is the fluid pressure doing, high pressure, return oil, and so on. That's pretty helpful. Also, just to be noted, in the back of this book, it also goes into power steering systems offered on the Dubuque built John Deere tractors, such as the 420, 430, and 440 tractors. So got to have these manuals to start with. They give you all the specs, specific information for these systems. So absolute must. Don't start this project unless you've got one, or unless you've done it before and you're simply going in and looking for replacing an oil seal. So we'll get started. On this tractor, we're going to go ahead and remove the front weights to reduce the weight in the front end, because I'm going to be also going into the steering pedestal and replacing seals and checking some things out there. So to get started, make sure you disconnect the battery from your tractor. I know it sounds silly, but there's a lot of electrical fires that have been started by carelessness, and that would be one of them. So go ahead and disconnect your battery, and then get to work taking your sheet metal off. We'll have to remove all of that. No matter which model tractor we're talking about, whether that's the 50, 60, 70, the 20, or the 30 series tractors that correspond to those. So we'll get that taken off and come right back. The power steering system used on the John Deere row crop tractors built from 1954 to 1960 in the numbered series were some of the most advanced for their design of their time. It enabled not only to have power assisted steering that literally, when working properly, you can use your pinky finger, or you can have either one of my girls, Adeline or Annie Grace, operate the system. But what happens if you lose power, the engine shuts down for some reason? You still have a mechanical link with the John Deere design from their steering wheel all the way forward to the steering pedestal and worm gear assembly down to the wheels, so that just in case you could still keep the tractor steerable. Alright, we've got all of our sheet metal off the 630, just had it running, did a little check over. A couple things I'm going to point out on this tractor. So your power steering pump, now that we've got the front nose cone and the grill off, you can see it a little bit better. It's right in here. It's driven off the fan shaft, which comes out of the governor. There's a shaft in there, and there's a couple spline couplers that can make all the connection and drive the shaft. It comes out here, drives the pulley, which powers your generator or alternator, and you've got your water pump down at the bottom. Something else I was looking at, I always like to take my fan shaft, and I don't know if this is a recent development on this tractor, but I shouldn't be able to do that with minimal effort. So in addition to rebuilding the power steering pump, looks like I'm going to be addressing the fan shaft slip clutch up here as well. Time, corrosion, and rust takes a toll on that. Something else I'll point out here. Now previously, when I had first gotten this tractor running after it has sat without running for several years, I replaced this hydraulic line, this flexible hydraulic line that actually supplies the pressure oil from the pump up here to the steering control valve. And Alex, if you want to swing around here, this is the steering control valve. So we've plumbed a gauge in to this. I've had to make a special adapter for it, something that you could put together at a hardware store parts. But the book tells you to get a gauge with at least 1500 psi pressure maximum, and I like 1500 primarily because you have pretty fine gradients. You can tell what your pressures are. So once we have the tractor running, we found that when we turn the wheels all the way to the extreme left and hold it there, it basically maxes the pressure out and makes your relief valve open. When turning all the way to the left, we had 1100 psi, which is right where it should be. When turning to the right, we only had 900 psi. Now this was at least 1,000 engine RPM, if not a little more than that. At idle, you'll find lower pressures. If you find lower pressure than this, you can suspect the pump is at fault. If you're finding consistently low pressure or no pressure when turning the pump or turning the steering wheel to the maximums left or right. Now when it's just running and the steering wheel's centered and it's at idle position, you're only going to get maybe 50 psi is what it operates at until you turn it and it actuates the valve and lets pressure build up in the system. Otherwise it's just running a nominal pressure. So that's what we found on this setup. Now I will also point out this is a later style steering control valve. The earlier style valves, per the book, and it gives you instructions in the book, you actually disconnect the pressure line here and you insert your gauge in sort of like a T-fitting. The book gives you instructions on how to do that. It's just simply where you install the gauge. The earlier style relief valves were actually built into the side of the power steering pump housing. Those have been used on like the model 50, 60, and 70 tractors, depending. There's different serial number breaks and things to be aware of. So in addition to having the service manual for the power steering, I'd highly recommend having parts manual for your particular tractor available as well. And don't be surprised to find, if you do have an older tractor such as a 50, 60, or 70 or a Green Dash 20 series tractor, don't be surprised to find updated power steering components from the late 20 and 30 series tractors on your older model John Deere, as those update kits were something that was available at the dealer, and if there was a major failure, the dealer would have upgraded those systems. Alright, so the next step for what we're going to do to remove the power steering pump, there's several things we've got to do. First off, number one, disconnect your battery if you haven't done so already. We had to have our battery connected, obviously, to start the tractor and run it up and check for flow and pressure. So the next step will be, after we disconnect the battery, we can remove the generator. It'd be a good idea to remove the toolbox if your tractor's got it, like on a 660, 620, 630. Maybe not necessarily you have to do it on a 520 or 530 or 50. Remove your exhaust pipe. We'll go ahead and need to drain the coolant. So that drains under the head. We'll drain all the coolant out because we're going to have to move this radiator forward enough to allow this pump to slide forward and remove it off the fan shaft. In addition to that, we're also going to have to drain the power steering pedestal. The drain for your power steering pedestal is right at the very front. There's a drain plug. It should have an extended, kind of a hollow extension and a plug at the end. Some of the real early ones may have only had a plug right here. They put this extension on so you could put a funnel here to drain the oil out and away instead of running the oil all over everything in your tires. In addition to that, you'll have to unbolt the bottom of the radiator. Probably have to disconnect the bypass tube on the water pump, your lower radiator hoses, and so on and so forth. Like on your 70, 720, 730, there's no lower radiator hose. It's just simply a tube with O-rings that seal on the end. There's some different things to be aware of there. But we'll have to get this radiator slid as far forward as we can to allow enough clearance to remove the power steering pump. So once we get all that stuff prepped and ready for the next pump removal, we'll be back with more video. Okay, so before we get carried away and tear down our pump, I want to do one little test to tell me about the internal condition of the vane seals. This is a rotary vane cylinder. It's inside this housing. To learn if we have the internal seals leaking, which you wouldn't know if they were leaking until you do this test, while we had it running, we turned our wheels to the extreme right position, shut the engine off. I'm removing this line. I'm going to take this line and lean it forward and put it into this container. And we're going to run it at fast engine speed, fast idle, And in 1 minute, if it dumps more than a quart of oil into my container, we know that the vane seals inside this cylinder are bad and need to be replaced. You only have to test this one direction, because if any of the seals leak, this test is going to show us that, essentially. So we're going to do that, and we'll be right back to tell you the condition of our vanes. Alright, so one thing I should mention before attempting all this, you see all the oil, rags are definitely necessary, and lots of rags. So Alex is going to start the tractor here in a minute. He's going to rev the engine up to fast idle speed, and he's going to hold the steering wheel to the far right position and basically build maximum pressure in the cylinder. We're going to run it for 1 minute and see what happens. Okay, Alex, fire it up. Notice we do have some oil coming out, but some is to be expected. So essentially after a minute we should have a quart or less in this container. We'll find out what that looks like in just a little bit. And also, by the way, for the record, this oil is particularly dirty. I'm sad to say my tractor is in such bad shape. Shame on me. Alright, so after our leak test on the vane cylinder, put it in a measuring flask. It leaked past 6 ounces, only 6 ounces of fluid in 1 minute at running at high engine speed with the steering wheel held in the extreme right position, building maximum pressure in the cylinder. So based upon this, that's less than a quart. So our vane cylinder is in good enough condition to leave as is. All being the oil, it must be changed, and we will drain that, of course, with having the pump off. Something else to note, our pedestal underneath is dry. If you get oil leakage down the pedestal onto the front end, definitely need to have the vane cylinder apart on your tractor. Those parts are all still available from John Deere, so that's good news for you. Not a huge project, definitely something to get a friend to help. So we've tested this. Now, finally, we're on to the pump. Alright, Alex has been making some good progress getting access to our power steering pump, which is right here. You notice on this side it looks somewhat clean, although you'll see some oil residue and some dirt and buildup here. Now if we go around to the other side of the tractor, it's where we really start to see some dirt and dust and grime hidden behind the air cleaner that was here. We removed. Look at all this stuff. Not real good, but it's typical of what you'll find on your power steering pump. Also note that at a time like this, with these things out of the way, it's not a bad idea to consider, especially if your radiator's plugged up with crud, that before you break into this pump or at some point in this process, you want to clean all that off to ensure that your tractor will cool properly. Okay, here we are. We've got the fan shaft the fan shaft tube from the pump disconnected. We had a hard time getting this coupler off. It was there was some rust in there. You can kind of see. Those are things that you can and will run into from time to time. There's a little pry bar help there. Cameraman and pry bar operator. Sometimes you just have to do it all. I think that shaft is the issue back inside the tube. With these couplers and whatnot, there's a coupler and spline shaft here, there's a spline shaft in the tube, and there's another identical coupler to that back by your governor. And the issue is if this slides out back in toward your governor, it can create some issues here in terms of clearance and room. So things you have to work on. Something else we did is put a little bit of cardboard, it's kind of hard to see, between the end of the fan shaft and the radiator core, unless you want to be putting in a core, or unless you have a reason to put in a core. I should mention, if you are going to be replacing the radiator core at this time, obviously remove the radiator ahead of doing the fan shaft and power steering pump. It'll save you some time and headaches. There's just barely enough clearance to get this out. There's a little lip right here. You can just barely see it. See if I can turn on the light. There you go. There's this little lip. That's actually the fan shaft tube. At the end of this spline has to come off and overcome that. there's just enough clearance to do it. Once in a while I've rebuilt some of these and found out where somebody took a hacksaw and notched the tube out on the side, so you don't have to, it gives you a little more room to work with getting the fan or the power steering pump out. Alright, so we got our power steering pump removed from between the radiator and the fan shaft tube. Let me stress, there is just enough room to work with in here. It's really, really limited. Some things that you can consider removing. There's a little shroud that goes up on top of a sheet metal shroud that's more or less a debris guard from sucking debris in around the radiator in the front of the core. This piece, you probably need to remove that. The radiator overflow tube as well, and if you really get in a pinch, make sure before we start, and I know this is, hopefully you watch this video before you get into it, but any debris between the radiator and this front support you want to clean out. It may even be necessary to remove the shrouds. There's some little sheet metal guards down on either side of the corner of your radiator so that you can move the radiator as far forward as possible. It's best to try this with 2 people. I assure you it will work. You may get frustrated to the point that you wonder, is it even possible to do this operation? John Deere engineers left us just enough room to get this done. On another note, while we're in this area, it's important, like on this model, and I think most models, depending, some have tubes with O-rings on each end inside of housings, the O-ring that's in here. Some will have tubes with connections that have a hose and hose clamps in between, but we want to replace the O-rings on these when we're doing this operation. You don't want to go back with it together with a used O-ring. Best on the end of these pipes, take an emery cloth, clean up the sealing surface, make sure it's smooth and uniform. You don't want to have any leaks there. A little trick I like to use sometimes on reassembly, I'm not a fan of silicone, but silicone before it sets up is like a lubricant. Everything's good and clean. With this O-ring, you can smear silicone in on this as you slide things back together upon the reassembly, and it not only lubricates, but then it helps to seal just in case there's some irregular surface left over on the metal. Alright, so here's our pump. I've taken it to the parts washer and I've washed some of the grime off the housing. So our next steps will be disassembling the pump, and per the book there's 2 ways to do this. I've disassembled the fan with the body of the pump and everything intact, which is kind of a pain because you see there's not a real nice large flat surface back here to work with. So the book would suggest you take these 4 bolts here out, and there's 5 more bolts here. You break your housing apart. The center portion of the housing along with the gears and the back of the housing will all come off of the pump assembly, simply leaving the shaft and the front part of the housing. Once we've got that apart, then we can put it in a shop press. The way we disassemble this keeper assembly is putting this in a press. These friction, well, the fan discs, I guess, the friction discs, have to be compressed. The spring's got to be compressed. Both these discs and the fan blade must go down far enough to release this collar. And then there's 2 tapered keepers in here. As you can see, it's pretty rusty, which is normal for these. They're either rusty or they're covered in oil or grease. But these keepers are tapered along with this collar. The collar's got to slide forward just far enough to release that. From experience, there's, well, just like getting the pump out with the radiator in the housing, there's just enough room to get it done. So we'll get to it and come back when we start looking at the inside of the pump. Alright, we got all of our bolts out. There's 2 bolts that you won't be able to remove completely because they back into the pulley. So to get this housing apart, brass hammer is highly advised. Tapping here, and you can rotate the pump, and you can tap back on these corners. The center housing should come with it. Note that all this, all the pump, all the pieces are held together or aligned with dowel pins. So just be mindful that they are in there. Okay, as I pull everything apart, we see the gears, we see the drive gear, it kind of came along, and then watch out for these little keys, these Woodruff keys. Those are all that drive the pump. There's just one little Woodruff key that drives the pump. If by chance your power steering wasn't working at all, you can suspect that little key having been sheared, causing the gear not to drive. So we're going to go ahead and remove and inspect the rest of the pump body. We've got an idler gear and a shaft, just like so, that sit in there. Gear teeth look pretty good. You'll notice that the gear teeth are really only worn on one side, as the pump only does turn one direction. So they all look like they're in pretty good shape. Now, of course, once we inspect the housing itself, that's where we can sometimes find the wear and the scoring along the housing itself. The end plate on this looks pretty good. I don't see any scoring to speak of on the end plate. But when you see scoring, you typically see it around the outside of the body, or the outside of the gears, where they meet the body, and I essentially see no scoring whatsoever. I'm going to say that's probably. Alright, so we just got these drive hubs loose so we can get the keepers out. It's important to note when you go to press, you've got to put the shaft on something solid in your shop press, and I highly recommend using a shop press. There's really no way to do it without causing major damage without a shop press. I have a 30-ton press, and it used probably 25 tons of its capacity. Also, it's important to note, we found actually an old piston pin that fit on this retainer. It fit over these keepers, but caught right on this retainer. The important thing about doing that is you push down this retainer is steel, you're pushing evenly around on it, and then it in turn pushes against the fan shaft drive hub here. It'll compress everything in there, and it'll also push the drive hub on the other end. You have to remember, the shaft is splined all the way through, and it's fighting a lot of corrosion to push those down. So you may inadvertently break the centers of these discs out, and be prepared to remove them, and not remove them, but replace them. So we've gotten it down far enough that these keepers are able to come free. And I mean, it's a very tight fit, and you've got to get everything compressed pretty tightly. But you notice that the keepers are tapered. The retainer is tapered, such that when it's locked in place, the spring tension that holds against it keeps it from coming apart. So from here, we'll get the discs off with the splines. It's probably a good idea to take a pick and clean up all the lands of the splines before attempting to put a gear puller on here to pull these off. Setup I have for the gear puller I use to pull the fan shaft discs off the shaft. You'll notice in here that it actually pulled the flat part away from the drive part with the splines on it. We'll have to probably put a bearing splitter on this and pull it the rest of the way, or actually break it. These drive discs are sort of like a magnesium type casting, so it's pretty fragile to say the least. So nothing to worry about here. The biggest thing I would just say is, whatever puller you use, be careful not to damage or bend the fan blades. Obviously, they're not easy to straighten, and once they get bent, even if you do straighten them, they're not going to be in balance. Alright, so we finally got the center hub off, like so. That was a bit of a challenge. Once again, using a 30-ton press and a bearing splitter to get that off. That was very much probably one of the worst ones I've ever removed out of the 15 or so pumps that I've worked over in my experience. So what I've done now is taken a fine pick and cleaning out the lands on the shaft so that the pulley, which is also splined to the shaft, can come off as easy as possible. Good to have a wire brush here to get all the dirt and grime and whatnot off of there. So, little luck. Even this is going to be a tough one. Looks like I may have to set up a puller. Yep, I probably will. Alright, so if you're like me, the first time I saw this housing, I thought, how in the world am I going to get this internal type snap ring out that doesn't have loops on it? It's not an E-ring, it's just a regular straight edge snap ring. Well, normally in a situation like this, you have enough edge to get underneath the rim and take a screwdriver or something and catch the end of the snap ring. It's almost like they cut the groove too deep, but the snap ring wasn't quite made right. I've only had success getting this out after my good friend Marvin, who taught me how to wrench on 2 cylinders, told me a little trick. He said, "Tyler, you'll lose a lot of hair if you try to figure out how to get this stuff apart the way that the engineer thought you should. So take an 1/8 inch drill bit, you can put it in a drill press or use it in a cordless. It's cast, it drills easy. You just drill right about to the edge and drill down until you go through the casting, hit the bearing. You're going to replace the bearing anyway. And then you've got a hole in which to insert your screwdriver and get the snap ring popped out and out of the groove. So the next time, if this ever has to be done, hopefully not in my lifetime, somebody will have a much easier path to get the snap ring out. Alright, so we've got our pump housing apart, and it's time to remove our oil seals because we're going to be replacing those. A couple tools that I like to use for removing seals. I've got some seal pullers. This is just a cheap seal puller that kind of goes in. You hook it on the seal and you can use a hammer to lift it out. This doesn't necessarily work great in the case of small seals. This is probably more appropriate for large things like axle seals. Another seal puller I can get, you can get these at any hardware store, is this rocker type seal puller. And I'll put this in the housing and the vise here. And make sure to get it good and tight. Got one seal out. And if I've got enough depth, I'll try to get the other seal out too. Oh, that one came out real easy. Got lucky on that. Now notice when these seals are out, they are installed so that the lips are facing away from one another, because we have to remember on both sides of the housing of this pump, we're keeping the air out and the oil in. So the seal with the lip facing out keeps it from sucking air into your pump, which is you don't want, and the inner lip keeps the oil from coming back out. So we'll do the same thing on this housing. Now on the the outer end of the housing by where the pulley goes, I don't know that my seal puller will be deep enough to get in there. I may have to use a hammer and a punch, a brass drift, to drive the seals out through the housing. So I'll get those out. I'm going to wash everything up and come back and we'll talk about how to install the seals. Alright, as we're ready to install our oil seals, we've got 4 seals total to install. So it's important to note, so the oil seal originally, and I didn't mention this prior, the older oil seals used like the 50, 60, 70, and the early 20 series tractors, it was actually 2 seals all made into one with a spacer in between. Well, that's something that's no longer available today. So what we've got to do today is use 2 single lip seals and install them together. Now, John Deere suggests for the rear housing of your power steering pump to add this spacer in between. It's an R21720. If you look it up in the John Deere parts catalog, it'll tell you to use 2 oil seals and add this spacer in between them. You only do that spacer for the rear half of the power steering pump housing. The front half, there is not room for that to happen. So what I've got a seal driver set up and ready to install. I'll start by installing my seal, and it's important as well to make sure the lips face outward, so the springs face outward from each other. So the first seal goes in with the spring down, like so. I'm going to use assembly lube and grease. I like to grease the housing because it's anything you can do to help lubricate the seal as it goes down in there makes it easier to install. It's also a good practice to use a hydraulic shop press when installing these. I realize that a lot of you may not have access to such a beast. If you don't, you can certainly do it the old-fashioned way. Just taking your time. The seals drive pretty easy. And I can feel that the seal is bottomed out in the housing, so I've got that installed. Then I'm going to put my spacer down next. And I think it may have to be driven as well. It's a pretty tight fit if I recall. You feel when it hits bottom. Be careful not to overdo that. So I'm also going to grease this seal inside and out. Install it lip out on my driver. taking care not to overdo the seal. You don't want to damage seals when we're installing them where we've wasted our time. So that's the front housing. We'll repeat the same process in the rear housing, or rather the rear housing, and then this is the front housing toward the fan shaft, toward the fan itself. In this one, we've only got enough room to do the 2 seals without the spacer. We'll install them in the same manner with the lips facing outward. So we'll get that in, and we'll come back on the pump reassembly. All right, I've got my pump pretty well on the final legs of getting it back together. Right now I'm putting a dressing. John Deere used to sell it. I don't know if they still do. Today Permatex sells it. It's called aviation gasket sealant. It's for sealing machine surfaces, and I use it on all my gasket dressing across the board. It takes a long time to really set up hard, so it gives you lots of time to work with what you're working on. A couple things I wanted to point out that I realized I didn't get into a lot in previous segments. So I have not replaced the bushings in this pump. They were all good. There was no scoring. It's a copper bronze type, I guess it's like a copper line bushing, and it's very easy to see if it's got visible wear because you'll see scoring marks in the bushing itself. These were all very good, which is fortunate. If you need to replace them, you drive them out and replace them with OEM bushings. John Deere still has them available. I'll also note that both the keys on the shafts I replaced because they're pretty darn important. Here's one of the old ones. Not a very big key, as you can see, that drives the whole power steering pump. But when you're going in this far, you definitely want to put new stuff in. I'll also make another comment before we slap this pump together. The ball bearing, which is on the front housing, was actually original, and you can't really hear it probably on the video, but it's got a ticking sound and quite a bit of play. So good thing, new departure ball bearing, they're out of business. So we know it's an original or very old bearing. So you definitely want to replace that bearing when you get this far into the pump. It'd be a shame to go this far without replacing a $10 bearing or so. All right, so I've got everything. I've got my gears reassembled. I used light assembly grease to grease all the bushings and the gear surfaces just to make sure that nothing's going together dry. I put coats of shellac or this gasket dressing on all sides of the housings. Took time to clean everything thoroughly. These are machine surfaces. They've got to be very clean, otherwise you will have oil leaks, and you certainly don't want those. All right, so I think we're ready to go ahead and install. Important to make sure your dowel pins are in place and lined up. And just be careful and take your time as you start to drop the housing onto, just like that. That's how they're supposed to go together. So housing's together. The next thing I'll do is reassemble with all the bolts. And then we will get to putting the fan shaft back together. All right, we're ready to reassemble our fan assembly after we got our pump all put back together. I didn't show it earlier, but of course I put the snap ring retainer back in to retain the bearing in the housing. Very important that that's in there, otherwise things could move around. You don't want that. Something else I should also mention is before you put everything back together, make sure your pump turns freely all the way through, just in case there was some sort of foreign body in there. Obviously we wouldn't want to put that back on the tractor and realize after the fact, whoops, there was a mistake. So we put the pulley on this side down. It goes up against the bearing. And I'll also note we had to pick and take a small triangular shaped file and dress up the splines and really get them clean and shiny. It's very important. If you don't do that, things don't move as they should. Over time, rust and corrosion, there's some rust pitting on that shaft. I'll also mention, and I didn't do this earlier, these shafts are available aftermarket today. If you search the internet for the part number, you should find there are a couple resources out there, sources for these shafts. Just in case you find that a keyway is ruined or the splines are ruined. I have seen the splines on this fan pulley, the drive pulley, worn out, as well as the splines on the shaft. This one was actually in pretty darn good shape, so we got lucky this time. Okay, so we put, first off, on the fan itself, the fan needs to be oriented such that the metal plate, the base plate for the fan blades, be facing toward the radiator. Remember, this is toward the radiator. So I've already found my home position, and I went and bought new tin pieces that the slip clutches fit in against, because the old ones were awfully rusty and pitted. I really don't like to reuse that stuff when new is available. So that's available from your Deere dealer. So putting in the new disc is supplied by Steiner, as well as the new fan hub disc. Okay, I'll be flipping this upside down, and better not forget my spring. The spring goes first, top of the pulley, and the first hub goes down. You notice it fits much tighter than the pulley did. In my next cup, I'll also note that I've pre-located the holes. These are the triangular shaped pattern here is uneven, such that it will only fit in one position on the fan. Very important that you get that in the right spot. Once again, friction disc and drive hub. All right, next I'll be moving on to my hydraulic shop press. I'll have to compress the spring all the way down far enough to get the keepers on and locked at the end of the fan shaft. Also note that I took and cleaned up the keepers with some emery cloth. There's rust and corrosion there. I want those good and clean. All right, I've got my press, everything set up nice in the press. I have two equal distance spacers here, approximately 2 inches in length. Whatever you do, you want to do equidistant and nice, and leave something open. Got a nice piece of 3/4 inch square stock across. So we're going to be compressing the fan shaft until the hub from the back disc is flat up against the drive pulley. And you only want to put light pressure against it. Obviously, once it's bottomed out, you need to stop. Okay, I'm there. Take my 2 taper collars, one in the back, slip it in, one in the front, slip it in like so, and then release. With the retainers in place, fans assembled, and now we can move on to putting it back in the tractor. All right. Something else I wanted to mention, and I've made a decision in working on this project, is while you've got the power steering system drained from fluid, it's a good time if you want to take a look at the worm gear, the valve assembly, at any point in time. If you have any oil leaks coming from where the valve assembly meets up with the worm gear, or from the worm gear to the steering pedestal housing, is a good time now to take this off. There's a set of shim packs that go in, again, behind the worm gear housing and the steering pedestal housing, and ultimately you add those to establish backlash between the worm and the sector gear that's in here. The power steering manual gives information around how to do that and how to handle that. In this case, I'm not necessarily as worried about that as I am on the 20 or the 30 series tractors. There's this cast support that comes up back here to support the U-joint, and there's a bushing in here, which this one is, I've got the casting loose, but it's really not too bad. But if you notice, if on yours, perhaps on your 30 series tractor, if that bushing's wore through, you want to replace that. But in this case, there is an O-ring. If you can sort of see, this is the end of the steering actuator sleeve, and right inside this housing is a little O-ring. Got a new one right here. And then another spot, there's a gasket between this steering support casting and the worm gear housing, and I've got that available right here from the John Deere dealer. There wasn't really a bad leak here, but it was enough that it was seeping a little bit and collecting dust and dirt around the housing. So while I'm here, it's a good time to do that.
just a good time anywhere else you've got leaks to address the system. So I'm going to do that, take it all off, put everything back together with the same number of shims as I found it, and then we'll go about putting the power steering pump back on the tractor. So when you're choosing oil for your John Deere power steering system, it's very important that you use the proper oil. And in this case, this is an oil that Deere, even after the two-cylinder tractors have ceased being produced in 1960, they're still selling and formulating power steering oil, part number AF2235R, available at any John Deere dealer. Most dealers here in the Midwest stock this. It's a specially formulated oil exactly for this system. A lot of people say, you can use motor oil, you can use high trans oil, but John Deere specifically engineered this oil for this system, a gear displacement type pump in a sealed environment with an additive package that is the best thing for the system. If you drain your housing and your pump, you're looking at about 5 quarts of oil, depending upon your system. You definitely don't want to overfill. So, when you look at your dipstick, at least on this 20 or 30 series dipstick, mark for the low and a mark for the high. It kind of gives you a range. Definitely want to be in the middle. Don't want to be overfilling. Very important not to overfill. Otherwise, you're going to end up with oil in places that you do not want it. So, just a little tip: buy John Deere power steering oil. It may vary in price from $8 to $10 a quart. Spend the money. It is well worth doing it right the first time, so you don't have to look at this again for quite some time.
All right, it's time to get our fan shaft, or the fan and the power steering pump, back into the tractor. I've already put a new gasket right here on the end of the fan shaft housing, so we've got that going for us. I've got my coupler and whatnot pushed all the way back in to ensure that all the linkages are lined up all the way from the front of the fan shaft coupler all the way back to the governor. I've got my radiator moved as far forward as I can, tilted a little bit, and cockeyed a little bit in this direction to allow me as much room as possible to slide the fan and the pump assembly in. And as I sort of line up the splines on the coupler by turning the fan shaft. Okay. Relax my radiator. So that it clears my fan and the radiator shroud. Okay, fan shaft is lined up, and we should be in good shape. Now all I've got to do is tighten the bolts, and we'll tighten the fan shaft first, and then we'll put the bolts in on the fan shaft support from the bottom up. Just want to make sure that those aren't in a bind. And then from there we can work to start reattaching our hoses and reattaching the radiator. Okay, I wanted to show a little bit about hooking up the solid power steering lines again. You'll notice the original lines, the steel lines, have a aluminum washer right here in the end. You might be tempted to reuse these washers. I've found that sometimes by reusing them, you're more prone to leaks. New washers are still available from John Deere, pretty inexpensive. So we'll be installing new washers on our lines. A little trick to make them stick on the lines: smear some axle wheel bearing grease or some reassembly lube, something kind of thick and sticky, and it will hold that on there while we're installing our lines on the tractor. Okay, before we bolt down our radiator, it's time to reinstall our upper water pipe. And this will be the case on a lot of models of tractors, just depending on your individual. And you can probably see here I took an emery cloth and I cleaned up the end surfaces of the tube real good so that, that the O-rings seal very tight. and we don't have any leaks. Now, I'm not a big fan of silicone-based sealants, except when it comes to these water tubes. I have taken black silicone. You can use RTV, high temp, whatever you have handy. And I've put silicone in the O-ring grooves in the lower and upper water pipe off the cylinder block, and in the thermostat housing where these O-rings are housed. I've also coated the O-rings with silicone sealant, not using an excessive amount. What I like about it is when the silicone is not set up, it sort of acts as a lubricant, because these pipes, there's a little bit of there's definitely some friction. They fit fairly tight and they help lubricate, and then once they're installed, then the silicone seals up and helps prevent leaks. I've been doing this for a while, and I've had excellent results. So I'll go ahead and put the O-rings, install the O-rings in the housings here. Kind of follow the O-ring all the way around, make sure they fit tight. Now, I bought these O-rings at my John Deere dealer. You should be able to get yours there as well, should you decide to replace them. Now, if you've just recently replaced them, for instance, after you did an engine overhaul or a radiator replacement, you can probably reuse the original ones. Sometimes the old originals sort of get flat like this, and they don't seal near as well when you go to put them back together. Okay, I've got my radiator pushed forward because this fits tight. So I have just enough room, I think, that I can install. And it takes quite a bit of force. You kind of have to twist and push at the same time. That works pretty well. Okay. I'm going to work on moving my radiator back in place. Kind of just have to turn and wiggle it into place. It's a tight fit. There we go. We're all back in place. Now I can go down here under my radiator and reinstall my mounting bolts that hold the radiator to the frame. So I'll do that, and when we come back, we'll take a look at hooking up lines and putting the worm gear back on the power steering pedestal. Couple things that I've done since our last segment. I've reinstalled all the lines, installed new aluminum washers on the ends of all the hard metal lines. I've also taken some time to put a clamp here between the return and the supply, the high pressure line. The return line or the supply line was really bent and distorted. Normally this clamp would go right here. There's a boss on top of the radiator top, but without compromising the line, I decided I was just going to clamp it here, and I also put a piece of rubber hose to go between the pressure and the supply. Basically any place you don't want these lines touching anything solid between the pump and the control valve. Over time, vibration leads to punching holes in lines, and that's something definitely we don't want. So make sure that the lines aren't touching anything that over time is going to lead to failure. I also, before I install the supply line into the power steering pump, I took and put just a few teaspoons of hydraulic oil, or the power steering fluid rather, down inside the pump. The reason for doing that is to ensure you don't have a dry pump. And now I did install a little light lubricating, light grease on the gears themselves, but that's sometimes not enough. If you've ever heard of vacuum or dry pump not getting prime, that's an easy way to remedy that. So we've got a little bit of oil in there to wet the whistle, so to speak, and prime the pump once I get going. I've still got several things to do, like replace coolant in the radiator, and then I've got a couple bolts to tighten up in the worm gear housing to the pedestal, and then I will fill the system with oil. I would suggest putting 4 quarts of oil in to start with, unless you've completely disassembled the pedestal, in which case you would need to go ahead and install probably 4 at the beginning as well. In our case, we've drained the majority of it out. There may be still a few ounces of oil in the pedestal, so I don't want to put all 5 quarts in and be over full. Very important on these systems not to overfill the system. It can lead to foaming and leaking out of the dipstick tube and other places. Also, something important to note, I'm going to take some carb cleaner. On the top of the dipstick, whether you've got this taller style for the 30 series tractors or the shorter style with the screwdriver slot in it for the earlier 10s and 20 series tractors, there's a little brass permeated, I guess you would call it a filter, just to allow gas pressure to escape. Not really oil, but gas. Make sure that that's cleaned out. I've seen a lot of those dipstick tubes modified. People getting leakage, and because there's an air leak in the system, they've modified the dipstick and basically made it so that it's not venting whatsoever. That's bad. It builds pressure in your system, and it's got to get out somewhere. Those seals and O-rings will only hold so much pressure. So something to check in on. Aside from that, I'm just going to continue reassembling, and we'll test it out in here in a little bit, and then we'll check pressures and center our valve and make sure our wheels steer even left to right. Alright, so we've got all of our lines hooked back up, everything's installed. We've test run our tractor, and for the purpose of the video I'm not going to make another mess, but I've had my adapter gauge, or gauge and adapter plugged into here. Now this is the later style design. The earlier style design, you actually plumb the gauge in with a T-valve between the hose and the steering valve assembly. But on our improved later style design, this gauge goes right in here. So what we did to make sure that your tractor steers evenly left to right, in case you've disturbed any of this, you put the gauge in. First thing you do is get it running wide open throttle. You adjust your flow control valve, which is right in here. There's a cap screw, a jam nut, and then a slotted rod that's in here. And you adjust it to about 130 psi. When your engine's at wide open throttle and you're not steering the tractor. That's the pressure it'll build up just to maintain good flow. And the book gives instructions on how to tweak that in one way or another. You can get too much flow and it makes the wheels flutter and so on. So to center the valve, there's 4 cap screws that attach the valve to the worm housing. And what we do is you have the gauge plugged in, and while the wheels are in the center, everything's stationary. You move the housing until you get the lowest pressure reading on the gauge, and that's approximately 100 psi, give or take, on our tractor. So basically what you're doing is ensuring that there's equal amounts of pressure in both the left and right direction when your valve is actuated. So we've done that. We've got it steering good in both directions. We'll go ahead and put everything back together here in a bit, and with sheet metal and so on, and that'll conclude our video. But I will mention just briefly, before I've done all this, make sure before you put your sheet metal back on, test run everything, look for leaks. We had a couple leaks on a gasket and so on here. Things that you don't want to put your sheet metal back on and realize later on that you had all kinds of power steering leaks. So lots of rags, and just fix those leaks. Okay. All right, so we've got the 630 power steering fan shaft pump rebuild all complete. The steering system's back up to par now. Sure nice to know you've got great power steering. So good luck on your project, and with the proper manuals and enough parts, you can have a power steering system that is better than new.